Thanks for tuning in. I'm Joel Amidon.
And I'm Ann Monroe.
And this is The Road to Better Teaching, a podcast series where we discuss stories of teacher development. Hi, Ann. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Hey, it's nice when you can tease something and it actually comes true, isn't it?
It happens. When we were, doing the intro, the very first episode of season 2, when we were recapping season 1, like we're a Netflix show or something. And I said we have a special guest. We had something a little bit different up our sleeves, and here we are today.
Yeah, and let's now we're on the Carson show. Well, Johnny Tonight Show. I guess how many of our listeners would know who Johnny Carson is? Hopefully, a lot.
I think they will.
Okay, but it's not like we're peeling.
Although they didn't know Lionel Richie's dancing on the ceiling at the Halloween party, so I'm a little concerned. But anyway, that's okay. That's okay.
All right. Enough of the chatter. Let's bring in our guest. We have Dr. Morris Stocks, who has a long tenured, been here at the university and he's going to talk about a number of years, but well-respected for his teaching. And we wanted to bring in a voice to talk about teaching from outside of the School of Education, because up until now, everyone has been associated with the School of Ed. So Morris, thank you for joining us on the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. And thank you and Ann for inviting me to be a part of the podcast. I appreciate that.
So, I mean, we had a conversation before this conversation and talking about all your different experiences. Maybe you can give just a little bit of a introduction for how did you get to where you're at now here at the University of Mississippi? I know that's
sure.
That's
yeah, I'll be glad to.
Yeah. Awesome.
So I actually had a teaching appointment for 8 years before I went back to get my PhD. So I was teaching in Nashville at my alma mater, and maybe I'll talk about that later, how that came about. But I taught for 8 years. I'm an accountant by trade, was working as an accountant, and was an accounting faculty member, and decided after 8 years, I guess I'm in this for life. So I went to the University of South Carolina to get a PhD, and from there came to the University of Mississippi as an assistant professor in the School of Accountancy 32 years ago.
Wow.
And have had the privilege of doing lots of things during that 32-year period. Served as associate provost for a while, came back as dean of the School of Accountancy. After about 5 years there, Robert Kayat was our chancellor and was considering retirement, and asked me to come into his office in a position called senior vice chancellor. And I've told this story before. I asked him what my job description would be, and he said, "Your job description is to do anything I don't want to do." So that's what I did for a couple of years. And then our provost, Carolyn Staten, announced that she was retiring, and I applied for that job and served in that position for about 10 years. A little bit of that time we were without a chancellor, so I served as interim chancellor for a part of that time. And about 5 years ago, I decided I had done my duty as an administrator and came back to the faculty in School of Accountancy. So I've been back on the faculty for about 5 years and feel very privileged and blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah. And, one of those things, your reputation for your teaching precedes you. And so it was for Ann and I was like, hey, let's invite him. Let's see if he'll come on and talk on the podcast about his teaching.
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. I as I mentioned to you earlier, it makes me a little bit nervous as an accountant to be talking to a bunch of educators about teaching. But my teaching career is now over 40 years. I continued to teach while I was an administrator. So maybe I've learned something during that time.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've got a few things to share with us.
Yeah, I hope so.
Right. And I do want to, I'm going to acknowledge it, but both Dr. Monroe and Dr. Stocks, Ann and Morris, have both been a recipient of the Hood Award, which is the largest award we have here at the University of Mississippi for teaching. And so, and I also know in order to get that award, it's not just let's see what he does this year. Let's see what she does this year. That means that there's a reputation for a while for good teaching. And so it's a recognition that you both deserved. And again, I'm glad that I get to work with Ann a lot, and hopefully she's thankful to work with me. But then also too, it's nice to be able to tap into some of that expertise here and be able to that's one of the things that we want to do with this podcast is honor good teaching. And then, so thinking about also just like, what's the story to get there? And so thank you again for being willing to come on and do that. So, but we know the journey starts with other teachers, right? And so, if you could take a moment, like think about, and we always talk about like this kind of countdown. So thanking 3 teachers who have helped shape your development as a person.
Yeah, and if you'll allow me, I'll take a little bit of liberty in this, and I'm going to start with my parents.
Awesome.
Both of whom I'm a generation at least ahead of you two, but I'm privileged that both my parents are college educated. My mother had a graduate degree, and they were both teachers at various times during their professional career, even though they were never my teacher. But they instilled a lot in me that helped me appreciate the value of education. My dad was a mathematician and probably guided me toward a degree in accounting, and my mother ended up being a librarian after years in the classroom, and just instilled in all of us, my 3 sisters and I, the love of reading. So I think they were major contributors in who I am today. The second person I might mention is a man named Gerald Skinner. So both my parents are deceased, and Gerald Skinner's deceased, but I attended Trevecca Nazarene University on a tennis scholarship, and he was my accounting teacher. So it's a small business school, and we had 3 accounting professors, and he taught most of the critical accounting courses that I took as an undergraduate. And I just learned so much about not only accounting, but how to conduct a classroom, how to, raise expectations among students and have them strive for excellence. And I owe a lot to Gerald Skinner. The third teacher that I might mention was a faculty member, but my relationship with him was as my tennis coach. And to tell you how much he meant to me and how much I learned from him and how much I appreciate what he did for me, he was best man at my wedding. And he co-signed on my first car. So that's a big deal.
Wow. He must have really liked you, Morris.
Yeah.
He must have. So, or trusted me, maybe. I don't know. But much of my teaching, and I never took a course from Alan Smith, but much of my teaching I learned from how he treated people, the respect that he showed people. And he had a way of, once again, expecting excellence, but making you feel appreciated every step along the way. And there are others that I could mention, but those 3 came to mind immediately when I talked about teachers who had impacted my life.
Nice. Yeah, that's the first time we've had the cosigner on the car.
Yeah. I'm still in contact with him weekly. He calls me every week.
Wow.
Oh, that's awesome. So what were 2 reasons or events that led you to being a teacher? Well,
as I said, I mentioned to you earlier when we talked that I started out as a math major and wasn't quite sure where that was going to lead. I ended up completing a mathematics degree, but along the way, I started taking accounting courses. And so I graduated with an accounting degree, and I mentioned my dad. At that point in time, you could sit for the CPA exam with a baccalaureate degree. But my dad, who was not an accountant, but had learned that eventually to sit for the CPA exam, you was going to require a master's degree. And that was coming into play at different points in different states. I took the CPA exam in Tennessee before that was required. But my dad kept saying, you ought to think about, getting a master's degree in accounting. Other people are going to have a master's degree that you're going to be working with. And so I decided that would be a good strategy for me. So I began moving in that direction. So all my education was in accounting. My undergraduate degree in accounting, my master's degree in accounting and information systems. So at my little institution where I was a student, for the sophomore level class, which is Principles of Accounting, the professor would ask one upper level student to serve as what they call the lab instructor in that class. And so I was surprised to be invited to take that position. It came with a scholarship. And so what I would do for the sophomores who were taking Principles of Accounting 1 and Principles of Accounting 2, I would go in, and what had been done in the past is the lab instructor would take the solutions manual into the classroom and allow students to come up and look at the solutions manual. And I was to guard the solutions manual. And so, I was in there and every Friday I did that during these two sections of Principles of Accounting. And after a couple of class sessions, I realized that people were just coming up and asking about the same problems. There were some that were more challenging. And kind of on the spur of the moment, I said, why don't we work this problem as a group instead of y'all standing in line to look at the solution manual? So that kind of changed the way that lab was conducted for me for that year, and I also did it my senior year as well. And that probably planted the seed about maybe I could use my accounting degree to do something other than be an accountant. Another thing that I would mention, so I went on and I was working as an accountant. I was a controller of a company and had an accounting team that worked underneath me. And at this same school where I had attended, Trevecca Nazarene University, one of the three faculty members went on maternity leave. And so the department chair, who is the same guy Gerald Skinner, I mentioned him earlier, asked me to come back. And so I'm working full time as an accountant. And he asked me to come on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning to teach a course from 7:30 to 8:45. And to come on Tuesday and Thursday to teach a class at lunchtime. So I'm working full time and teaching 2 college courses, and I agreed to do it for the fall semester. Then she decided not to come back from maternity leave, so I did it for the spring semester. And then she decided she was not coming back to work, and so that led to me being invited to be a faculty member. At that point in time, I had completed my master's degree and was a CPA, and for that level of non-graduate degree granting institution, that qualified for SACS accreditation, a CPA and a master's degree. So I went there as a faculty member. I've mentioned this to different people. My wife tells me I'm a terrible career planner because I like every job that I ever have. And so I was happy with the job that I had, but I thought of going and being an accounting professor at this school. And what actually probably cinched the deal was I was also assistant tennis coach. So that made it a little more inviting. But I served there for 8 years as a faculty member before going back to get my PhD.
Nice.
I like how that parallels, Joel, some of the guests we've had. at a different level who became interested in teaching from working with young children, like tutoring, or even in my background, one of the things that I mentioned that led me to teaching was the experience I had as a fifth grader being asked to work with the kindergartners at my school and working with them on their sight words and things like that. And that's what sparked an interest in me, in addition to other things. But we've had a lot of our pre-service teachers, Morris, in our department, whose experiences early on as young children working, at schools, being able to tutor someone younger than them or working at a camp or something like that has really sparked their interest in teaching. Same thing for you, but just at a different level.
That's right.
Which is interesting. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah, you turned to what was probably this like cushy gig where you're like just the garter of the manual, garter of the solutions manual to a, where was like a forced study hall basically to place where you can get some answers to now, wow, actually providing some insights and actually doing some teaching, right? And helping them figure things out. That's awesome.
It was a good experience for me.
Yeah. Well, also too, just like the noticing of that where, it obviously didn't bother some folks beforehand, but then you're 2 in and you're like, 2 sessions in and you're like, well, there's a better way to do this. And so that, there's some gifts there and being able to exercise that. So that was a story of your development as a teacher. So we ask people, guests of the podcast, to basically kind of place a mile marker on their growth to better teaching. So tell like a story of their growth as a teacher. So what would be like a mile marker of your growth as a teacher?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, 40 years, there's probably more than one mile marker.
Yeah.
And it's a little, it's not really an easy question. I've listened to some of the earlier podcasts and there's some really compelling stories that I've listened to. And I'm not really the aha kind of wow that's really not me. I'm kind of a deliberate person and think about how to do things before I get involved in things. And that's probably served me well as an administrator, I think. But I will tell you that I had an incident there when I was teaching at my first institution that kind of impacted the way that I have, operated my entire career. So as I mentioned, I graduated with an accounting degree. I went and got a master's degree in accounting and information systems. And so we were revising our curriculum there, and there was a need to add some information type systems into the degree. And I was probably the most prepared to teach those types of courses, but you two won't even remember this computer language that I'm going to mention, but I had basic programming. I had COBOL program as a student, but they were wanting to teach Pascal programming, which I knew nothing about. And I mentioned Gerald Skinner, who just expected people to rise to the occasion, no matter what the occasion was. And he assigned me to teach Pascal programming.
Wow.
I had never taken a course. I had never worked in Pascal programming. But I'm also the kind of guy that, thinks if your boss asks you to do something, you ought to try to do it, And so I went into class. There were about 20 students, and I'm telling you, this is so far before your time that we had TRS-80 Tandy TRS-80 computers, and they were pitiful little computers, and it's 5 1/4 inch floppy disk that you put into the computer to load the program,
Mm-hmm.
And so I went into class, and that time I'm probably 25 or 6 years old, and the students are 20 years old. And I just said, look, this is new in our curriculum, and we're going to learn how to do this together. we're just going to, we'll both benefit by doing this, and I'm going to stay about 2 weeks ahead of you in the process. and taught a course that I didn't know how to teach. And it was a good experience for me, a good experience for them. Helped me understand that we have to be constant learners as faculty members. We have to, you all know a few years ago, on spring break, we're told, all your classes are going online. And I had never taught an online class in my life, and I'm over 60 years old at that time. And I'm looking at my 403B account thinking maybe it's time to do something else. But instead, and while I didn't enjoy the pandemic and all the ways that impacted our university and students and faculty, it has continued to impact the way I teach. I learned things through that process that helped me become a better teacher. Even as a face-to-face live teacher, I learned things during that process, resources that I could make available to students that I create that would help them be successful in class.
Yeah, I had a similar experience too, Morris, with the pandemic teaching. I'm continuing to incorporate things I was forced to do during the pandemic into my teaching now because they work better. And,
right.
I didn't know I would have never introduced some of those practices into my classroom prior to the pandemic or even thought about them. And then they worked so well, and we had a lot of support at the university. Joel and I got to participate in the, resilient teaching communities and work with our faculty in that. And just very similar experience. It completely made me think about what I was doing in my face-to-face classes that really could be more effective in a different way.
Right.
So,
yeah, I ended up in that shortened semester and then continued it into the next fall where the next fall I taught over 300 students in intermediate accounting. And if you remember, we could only have 50 people in a room at a time.
right.
And I was teaching over in the Jackson Avenue Center. So I would have 50 students in there, and I would have to do that course 6 times.
Oh my goodness.
And so it was challenging. So I created these videos, these voiceover PowerPoint videos that to make sure that the students were getting this technical content that's necessary in our curriculum. And we got through that semester. And then the next fall, I'm teaching face-to-face live. And at the end of the second chapter, third chapter, a couple of students come up and say, "Hey, we hear you've got these videos that you made." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Could we have the videos?" And I said, "Let me get back to you on that." And so what I finally decided was if they came to class and if class attendance continued to be strong, then I would post the video after I taught the material. And I did that through Panopto, and I could see who was watching the videos and how many times they. So I continue after I've taught the material to make those videos available if they want to go back and watch again. And so it's been a good thing. I learned a lot, even at my advanced age. So
It's kind of like Morris Stock's Khan Academy. You could start your own website. This could be your next favorite job.
Maybe so. Yeah. It could be, yeah.
Well, you were also telling me too previously about like you had the office hours, like the online office that you continue to.
So you remember during that time we were trying to not be too face-to-face with students in close contact. So I created Thursday afternoon office hours. They could join, and I would invite half the class for the first hour and half the class for the next hour. And I would, as you know, in office hours, students frequently ask the same questions when they come in. And so I wanted it to be a little more personal. So I required that they have their video on and have their microphone on. I would let them start, and we would, talk about the issues that they had, and then I would throw in an extra couple of practice problems that I had created that they could work on. That continued after the pandemic. People asking me about, because, like I said, I had so many students, and my office mates complain when there's a line of 25 students waiting to get in my office out of here. And so it just worked well for some students to do Zoom office hours, and continues to be that way.
Well, it seems like we're talking about, like, the question we asked is, like, you talk about that, teaching that Pascal programming language class and having, like, thinking about the humility and that you needed to have with that, like saying, hey, I'm just 2 weeks ahead of you, and we're kind of learning this together. And then even to, fast forward, to 2020, when we're, trying to convert things on, like, hey, like, these tools I'm learning, we're putting this out there. And so, we're kind of doing some of these things together as we're laying track as we go. So you can see, like, that, how that mile marker and that kind of that approach or mindset towards teaching kind of echoes in your experience during the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of view students as my colleagues in the process, and I think they appreciate that. I've been teaching intermediate accounting for a long, long time, but my goal is to make students comfortable as you go through that process. It's been a very rewarding career for me.
Yeah. So, like, we like to, so, like, thinking about these mile markers, these moments of professional growth, and we like to connect them to our standards, because basically our message is, like, if it's important to you and your growth as a teacher, then it's also important to the field. And so Ann and I have these in-task standards. Ann knows what in-task stands for: interstate
New Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium.
There you go. And so we have a set of 10 standards, and so I don't, I heard in what the story that you shared, possibly standard 9, professional learning and ethical practice, like being able to, hey, being willing to open up to learning new strategies, new skills, new things, and also ethical practice, like doing what's best for my students, like, saying, hey, here's, sometimes, unfortunately, during some of those hard times during the pandemic, there was like, well, here's what we need to do versus, like, here's what I probably should do in order to better support my students. And you were thinking about that. I don't know, Ann.
And I thought standard 9 as well, under professional responsibility, as Morris was talking about his mile marker. Also, standard 10 is leadership and collaboration. The teacher seeks appropriate leadership roles and opportunities to take responsibility for student learning. So thinking about, just even way back when you were working as that TA and manning the book, the answer book, guarding the book, taking that responsibility for the student learning. We obviously noticing a problem and taking responsibility for that, collaborating with learners, which you were talking about, your office hours and how you see them as colleagues. I think that's wonderful. That seeing your students as colleagues, I think that can be something our students in the School of Education can learn from, because even if you're working with young children, there's a level of humanity you can connect with, and respect that person regardless of age, for what they bring to the table. But I think that standard 10 with leadership and collaboration stood out to me as well.
Well, also, I mean, think about the connection to the field. Like, a lot of teachers sometimes, with the way that people move out or people retire or whatever, like, all of a sudden, like, somebody's going to have to teach a course that they've never taught before, and basically someone says, like, a shoulder taps you as a, hey, I think you can do this, and to have that, like, not that you have to go in with, like, I'm going to know all the answers and everything, but, like, you know what, we'll figure this out together. It's like a level of humility and honesty towards that role that and we'll figure it out. We'll make it happen. So,
well, and that happens a lot to K-12 teachers, particularly in the upper grades in high school, where there's a lot of teacher shortage around math and science, and really everywhere now, but particularly in the math and sciences. And you have a mathematics, maybe you have a teacher that's taught middle school math, but they haven't taught calculus to 12th graders yet, and they're a little nervous about that. And I think just, if you've got good teaching down, that relationships, the understanding of connecting with your students on a personal level, and you can, manage your classroom, you can figure out the content. And you can, just like you said, we're going to figure this out together, stay 2 steps ahead and be the guide and get the work done.
Well, even this year, I taught a PhD seminar the first 20 years of my time here. Even after I was provost, I was still teaching the PhD seminar, research seminar in accounting. And I haven't done it for about 10, 12 years. And right before this semester, my dean comes and says, look, we've had a kind of a crisis situation. I need you to teach your seminar. And I'm thinking, 12 years removed from that. But I said, yeah, I can do that. And thought about it for a little while and decided that, I could do with a little bit of work, I could do the first half of the semester, the research design portion, and teaching them how to critique scholarly work and reading some seminal type papers. And then I've had 3 young faculty members who are in the prime of their research career who are teaching in the area that this seminar is to cover, and they've come in for 2 weeks each and share their research and the background for their research. And it's been a real good experience for me. It's kind of refreshed me on my research, and they've enjoyed doing. I mean, one of those 3 will take over this seminar before long. And
nice.
So you kind of just step in, and I always view it as a challenge rather than a chore. And I think I've taught about a dozen different courses since I've been here at the university, and it's just teaching. I consider teaching a high calling. Honestly, we're privileged to get to do what we do, and we influence people, and it's great to have that opportunity, even if the opportunity is a little more difficult than we would like for it to be. Yeah. It's great to do.
Yeah. So we ask our teacher candidates to develop what we call a pocket-sized philosophy statement. Like basically they develop a paper in one of our courses on their kind of teaching philosophy, and then we say, hey, what's the version you carry around with, like a mantra or whatever, that for your teaching, so that kind of guides your actions in the classroom. So when you're trying to think, like, how to respond to that request, or how to respond to that student's behavior or whatever, or how to think about a teaching situation, they can kind of lean on that. Do you have anything like that, like a pocket-sized philosophy statement?
Well, I will tell you that when I go into class the first day, I talk. So I for the last 5 years, I've been teaching intermediate accounting. So that's the course. That's the first course that only accounting majors take typically. Mm-hmm. And so, you hear people talk about that course. It's the one that separates the accountants from the bookkeepers. And so I talked to them on the first day that I feel like it's my responsibility to set high standards for you. That, you've got, for example, the CPA exam down the road, and it's a technical exam, and you need to know this material. And then I talked to them about moving from where they've been for the first 2 years of their education to mastering material, that we now have to begin to master the material, not be comfortable with the material, but master the material. And I continue to reinforce that throughout the semester. I also tell them, and this is for my benefit as well as theirs, that I want to get to know them. And I have some ways that I do that. I create a seating chart. I say, when you come in next time, sit wherever you want to sit, but we're going to have a seating chart. and I'm going to have your picture on my seating chart. I'm going to ask you to fill out a name card and keep that on your desk at all times. And I tell them that I want to be able to interact with you and call you by name in class. And I want your classmates to know your name. You know, my classes have about 100 students in the class. And I want your classmates to get to know. And the boy, they do. They bring their name tag and set it up there. And then I guess the other thing that I would say about that is that when I have a personal is maybe too strong a term, but when I have a relationship with my students, it seems to improve the learning process. You know, I think when a student knows that you know their name, when you speak to them in the hallway, when you know, talk to them about their progress in the class, then they seem to up their effort level a little bit. So that's more than a pocket size philosophy statement, but that's kind of the way I approach my teaching. And it seems to work. Students like to be respected, like to be known. And my after a long time, I believe students rise to the occasion. Even though it may be hard for them, they rise to the occasion if expectations are high.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I know that relationship piece is so important. We talk about that a lot in the School of Education, and even talk about, teach and we talk about classroom management the first day of school. If you know the students' names, there's a lot of things that work in your favor, even in something down to behavior when you're dealing with a K-12 situation where you have to manage behaviors in a different way than you may in a college setting. Knowing the students' names early helps with that, but also just building that relationship and the motivations there, because they don't want to disappoint you. If they feel like that you respect them, they respect you, and they don't want to disappoint. They really want to do a good job. And I think that's just a huge part of teaching, is building those relationships. Yeah.
Well, I agree completely.
Let me build on that too. Like, not only knowing the students' names, knowing how to say them correctly, because that's another thing too, and because making sure, I always say it's the first gift that they were given in this world. So making sure that you know it accurately for our teachers here, but then also too, and I love, and I just want to underscore this, and you talk about making sure not only that you know their names, but that they know each other's names. And because, the message that sends is like, hey, this is not just a one-way street, but this, just between you and I, and then, it's a bunch of individuals in the class that have these individual relationships just with me, but relationship with each other. Cause I might be teaching something to, two of you, one of you gets it, the other one doesn't, but the other one has a good relationship with the other person. And all of a sudden, like, Dr. Stocks is teaching to the one person leads to the other person teaching the other person. So like, it may not be a direct relationship, but eventually they're getting the material because you've established an environment where those relationships are seen as valued. Right. And so I think it's a nice thing.
Little tricks to accomplish, when we do their name tags, we have their name both on the front and the back of the name tag. So people behind them can see their name and know their name. I just think, it's good to know and be able to interact with your colleagues.
Yeah. Like I would say, like, hey, make sure it's on the back, because when you say something brilliant, you don't just want to say someone say, wow, that was brilliant. Like, no, Jimmy said something brilliant.
That's right. That's right.
Well, and that, we kind of get to the bottom where we kind of like think about what are some resources that get this conversation thinks about. And I want to bounce this off of Dr. Monroe or Ann. I thought of hearing all the different things that Morris is talking about. I thought of the book, The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer, and thinking about he talks in that book, he talks about this like dominant method of truth knowing and truth telling. And it kind of reminds me of that first instance where you were, the guardian of the solutions manual, and basically like having this, like, hey, this is not right. We got to do something better than this. And then he talks about like building, it's like basically then the subject becomes in the middle, and that everyone, the student and the teacher, are all just interacting around in order to get a better relationship with that subject. And it just seems like that, going to the story of, you leading the session to work through the problems initially, and then even talking about the course with Pascal and then doing the programming. It's like, and even like your current situations, and even to the seminar you just talked about, where, hey, we're bringing in more people so that we can all get better at this, whatever, the doctoral seminar, or thinking about research around this. Like, seems like those are the kinds of environments. So that book, The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer, it's a classic book and the author lives in Madison, Wisconsin, by the way, Ann, I don't know if you knew that.
Well.
There you go.
Another lover of cheese.
That's right.
Like Dr. Amadon. Well, I was thinking a couple of books for our elementary teachers that might be of interest. And these are oldies but goodies. And when Morris was talking about this idea about community, talking about his students, which I love, he's calling colleagues, which is the best thing ever, that it's a community. We're in this together. We're learning, we want to know each other's names. It's not just me know your name, et cetera. It's Reggie Routman's 2 books that really were influential for me, which are Invitations and Transitions. It's language. It's about teaching language arts in an early, like a K3, K6 setting. And I think they're not as popular as they used to be with because she was considered a whole language person, and people are all upset about the whole language business. But anyway, if you do it right, it does all the things it needs to do. But she really talks a lot about building community in a language arts classroom, the learners sharing with each other, writing together, reading together, literature circles, all the things that in an elementary classroom around language arts instruction are about community. And so I thought about those books that were influential for me that were introduced to me by one of my college professors, Cindy Lee, and mentors and dissertation chair and all around fabulous person. She introduced those texts to me, and I had been teaching for a while, and I came back to school and I was reading those books by Reggie Routman and thinking about all of the missed opportunities that but also some of the things I was doing well. I was like, hey, I was doing that. And, but wow, I could have been doing this. And so those are 2 great books for elementary teachers to think about and revisit. Reggie Routman's Invitations and then Transitions, 2 separate books.
Well, and I'm open the door, just given I know how much you read. Morris is like, I don't know if you had any resources or anything you want to point people to that maybe have informed your teaching, or they maybe informed your, and also too, I mean, you've been a university leader as well. So maybe there's some key resources you want to mention. I don't know, just open the door to you.
Well, one of my favorite books that I recommend in class to students is a book called Good to Great. And, and it's just been helpful to me to think about how to go from being good at something to great at something, and even though a lot of that book is about how certain businesses moved from one level to the other, it's also about what they call a level 5 leader. What is a level 5 leader? And that's helped me along the way. And it's a classic among business books, and I recommend it to lots of folks. But I've written down the books that you've mentioned, and I'll add it to my reading list. I love to read. So
yeah, awesome. All right. Well, thank you for being a part of the podcast. We really appreciate you sharing your mile marker, your story on your road to better teaching.
It's been a privilege for me, and I thank you for what you're doing. This is great.
And thanks to all of you out there for tuning in to the Road to Better Teaching. This episode may be over, but the Road to Better Teaching never ends. Please subscribe to the podcast so you're notified when the next episode is ready to listen. And if you like what you hear, please rate and review the podcast.
You can also share the podcast with someone you feel may be interested in these stories of teacher development. And if you want to find any links to the resources mentioned, you can check out the show notes for this episode at roadtobetterteaching.com. Thank you to all you listeners out there for taking the road to better teaching. This world is a better place because you have used the gifts you've been given to teach others. And the Road to Better Teaching podcast is an Amidon Planet production.